Hey friends, my name is Oleg. This is Mr. Bond. Welcome back to the YouTube channel. In today's video, we're going to do a review of my very first Rolex watch. A Rolex Datejust 36mm. It's a vintage model that I purchased in November 2018, and now it's March 2020. So I've had it on my wrist for over a year and 3 months or so. And at this point, I feel like I know this watch really well. Now, this has been a grail watch for me for a long time. It always has been at the back of my mind. I really wanted this specific watch. Now, the story behind this purchase, I have a full video about this, so you can watch that video if you want to hear the full story, but I'll give you a quick summary. A local watch enthusiast was selling his Datejust. It was a friend of a friend. He wanted 3,500 Canadian dollars. I negotiated him down to 3,300 Canadian dollars. That's about 2,500 USD. At this price point, it's a really good deal. The watch was serviced, came with a box, no papers, a pretty good condition, and I didn't have to pay any sales or import taxes. There aren't too many sellers in Canada that sell Rolex watches. Most of them are from overseas or from United States. When I import these watches, when you buy them from eBay or Chrono24, one of these websites, when you import them into Canada, there is quite a hefty import tax. Import tax on this watch alone would have been about 700 Canadian dollars or roughly about 500 USD. So buying it at 2,500, it was a good deal. Now the watch is not perfect, it's not a perfect condition. It has been worn and it has been loved, and that's why I love it. The way I'm going to do this video, the first portion is going to be focusing on the review of the watch, close-up shots, specifications, things like that. By the end of the video, I'm going to talk about my feelings towards the watch and my experience with owning it for over a year now. So let's get started with the review portion first. Let's begin by looking at the case dimensions on the watch first. It has a diameter of 36 millimeters. It's 43.5 millimeters from one lug to another. It has a lug width of 20 millimeters and it's only 12.5 millimeters thick. And here's what the watch looks like on my 7.5 inches or 20 centimeters wrist. To a lot of people, 36 millimeters Datejust is just way too small. They think that that's a women's reference, and totally fine. I'm not gonna argue with you here. For me, I think this is just a classic Rolex size, and the watch to me wears beautifully. It has a very comfortable weight of 90 grams, and it has a long enough lug-to-lug distance where the watch doesn't disappear on your wrist. Actually, if you have a chance, try one of these on. You will be surprised how well they wear. They definitely don't wear like a tiny 36 millimeters as you would assume. They wear closer to 38, 39 millimeter modern watches. Let's stay on the subject of the size for just a minute here or so. So whenever I review a watch that's about 37 millimeters, like for example, this watch right here, the Seiko SNK, I complained that it wears smaller and that it probably is a little bit too small for my size of wrist. So how come this watch right here, being larger than the Rolex, being 37 millimeters, is too small for me, for my preference, but this Rolex at 36 millimeters is just right? Well, first of all, there are two different kinds of watches. This is a sports watch, where this is not really. I mean, this is kind of a dress watch that looks like a sports watch. And if you put them side by side, in my opinion, Rolex, because it has that long lug-to-lug distance and the shape of the case, it wears larger than the Seiko, or at least the same. Now let's continue this comparison by looking at another legendary Seiko watch. Now this one is the Seiko Stx. The reason why I compare a lot of watches size-wise to a Seiko Stx, because most people are familiar with the way Seiko Stx looks and wears. So once again, Seiko Stx is 42 millimeters, Rolex Datejust 36 millimeters. Clearly, Stx is larger. I mean, of course. I don't think they look similar in size, but the difference in size is not as dramatic as you would assume. So once again, my recommendation is, if you have smaller size of wrist or even medium sized wrists and are considering either 36 millimeter or 41 millimeter Rolex Datejust, try one on. You might be surprised of how well it fits on your wrist. I have the stainless steel version of Rolex Datejust, of course. It's made out of 316L stainless steel. It's not made yet out of the 904L stainless steel like the modern Rolex watches are made out of. And this is a vintage watch, so it has been polished and has been worn and loved over many years. I mean, this watch was made in 1979, so it's 41 years old, and looks like it's been enjoyed every one of those years. It wasn't one of those watches that was locked up in a safety box somewhere. It was worn and enjoyed, and you can definitely see some battle scars and some scratches on this case, plus polishing done over the years. Now, I can't talk too much about finishes because a lot of the finishes have been polished out over the years, but I can talk about the case shape. And one of the things that you should look out for whenever you buy one of these watches is look at how sharp the edges are. If the case has been over polished, these edges will become quite dull. As you can see on this one, they're not as sharp as they could be, but they're not too dull, so they're kind of medium, I'd say. A couple of things that I really like about this watch are the case shape and the drilled lugs. First of all, the drilled lugs is just a good idea for any watch. I don't know why more watches don't implement this. It makes changing bracelets and straps super easy and convenient, also reduces the chances of you scratching the underside of your case. Now the case shape, I really like the way it kind of curves in. It hugs the wrist really well, and of course is the iconic oyster case. We have a crown at the 3 o'clock position. It is a Rolex signed crown, and it does have a screw down crown. I think initially these watches were supposed to have 100 meters of water resistance. Now I wouldn't risk swimming with this one because it is a 41-year-old watch and it did replace a crystal. We'll talk about a crystal. But the crown action is pretty good. So you unscrew it as such and it already pops out. So it doesn't have too much of a thread. Once again, old watch. And when you pull out the crown to the second position, the second hand stops ticking because this watch does have the 30-35 automatic movement with the quick set date and 28 joules. I was looking for a vintage Rolex with the quick set date. Having to manually set the date each time I wanted to wear this watch would have been a nightmare. The watch was also serviced right before I bought it, so the movement is super accurate, and that's one of the reasons why these watches stayed up in value for so long. One of the most accurate movements in business, super reliable, and doesn't need too much babing. You know what I mean when I say babing? If you collect vintage watches, you know that some watches are quite finicky. You have to really be careful every time you unscrew the crown, every time you do a date change, even how you wear the watch. You don't want to stress it too much, you don't want to give it too much vibration, or the movement will stop working, or some part of it will fall out and something will go wrong with it and you have to fix the movement. With Rolex watches, you don't really have to worry about that all that much. Even a 41-year-old watch doesn't skip a beat and is super accurate to within 3 seconds per day. These Rolex Datejusts are available with a few different styles of bezels. You could have a fluted bezel, you could have a white gold bezel, you could have a two-tone bezel, of course if the watch is two-tone. This one is called a engine turn bezel, and I really love that look. It's not too sunny today, so I can't really demonstrate it to you how well it plays with the light, but believe me, it plays with the light really well. But it's not too flashy. One of the reasons why I love this watch, it's flashy, but it's flashy enough. I mean, it's not like a Mr. T type of a watch where it really attracts a lot of attention to yourself. This one is kind of understated, but it can play with the light well enough, so you can still tell that it's a Rolex. When I purchased this watch, it actually had a different crystal. It had the original crystal to this watch, and I actually still have that crystal right here. It's in this little box. I replaced the crystal. Now, the reason why I replaced the crystal, nothing was wrong with it. In fact, it was a perfect crystal and original to the watch. The magnification over the years has kind of worn out over the years of polishing the watch and actually just wearing it under the cuff of your shirt. The shirt kind of rubs over that magnification and reduces it a little bit by a little bit. So by the time I got the watch, the magnification didn't really work all that much. It was pretty much like 1.5 times, not the 2.5 times as you would expect in the Rolex watch. It kind of bothered me, so I was thinking about it and I decided, hey, I'm gonna buy a Rolex certified crystal and replace it. Replacing this crystal actually wasn't that big of a deal, so the crystal itself cost about $150 and I suggest you buy a Rolex crystal. Don't buy third-party crystals. My watchmaker advised me against it. He said those crystals can easily crack, and once the crystal cracks, it can damage the hands, it can damage the dial, so you really don't want to deal with that. He said buy original Rolex crystal, and that's what I did. And to replace the crystal only cost me like $10. So what the watchmaker did, he just popped off this engine turn bezel and he replaced the crystal like that, so he didn't even have to take out the movement, he didn't have to unscrew the case back. Let's talk about the dial on this watch. Originally I wanted a Rolex Datejust with the blue dial. I think that's my favorite variation. However, this silver/champagne dial works really well. Also, the reason why I say silver/champagne dial, in certain lights, like right now, it looks silver, but in certain other lights, I mean, I can't really demonstrate it here at home, but in certain other lights, it looks champagne. And I really love how this dial plays with the light. And again, that play with the light is another reason why these watches are so popular. Actually, we have the handset perfectly aligned for me to demonstrate my next point. As you can see, the minutes hand is the perfect length to just reach out all the way out to the edges of these applied hour indices. Now it kind of moved over. But when they align, it's like one continuous hour hand. It's the perfect width and the perfect length to exactly match these hour indices. They even look similar. And it's the same story with the hour hand. The hour hand is just the perfect length to reach out all the way to the edge of the hour indices. Let me demonstrate what I mean. It would be easier. So as we go forward, as you can see here, when the hours are lined up perfectly, there's pretty much no gap, no separation. It just looks like one continuous hand. I thought that was really cool and really good attention to detail, and that again demonstrates just another reason why these watches are so popular and why they stood the test of time. And the same thing here with the minutes hand, what I talked about. You see, it just aligns perfectly. I also really like that applied crown for the 12 o'clock position. It's a cool little detail that Rolex does in their Datejust watches, and I think it just works really well. Now the Rolex Oyster Perpetual and Datejust are printed on the dial, they're not applied, and also printed on the dial by the 6 o'clock position we have Superlative Chronometer, officially certified, written there, and all the way at the bottom, Swiss. That's about it. Not too much writing on this Rolex, and I like that. I think now they're getting a little bit too crazy with all the writing on the dial. Taking a look at the case back, it's a very simple, plain Rolex case back, of course a screw down case back. There is no writing, there are no engravings on this case back. Now that brings me to the last thing that I want to talk about in this watch, and is this Jubilee bracelet. First of all, I love a Jubilee bracelet on this case. I think it looks excellent. But this bracelet specifically is my biggest negative with this watch. The bracelet is just too loose. It's too worn out. And every time I post a picture of this watch, every time I do a video of this watch, people keep on pointing out how loose this bracelet is. Now there are a couple of negatives to this. The first one is aesthetic negative. To me, it doesn't really bother me that much. I mean, whatever, it is a comfortable bracelet. But the more substantial negative is the functional negative of this loose bracelet. Over time, the pins in these bracelet links are worn out and the dust gets in and it kind of acts like a sandpaper. It wears them out. So if the bracelet is very loose, those pins might break one day and it becomes unsafe to wear a watch on such a loose bracelet. I think it's time for me to maybe either replace the bracelet, although I really don't want to replace the bracelet, or service it and get it tight again. I know there are quite a few different services that do tighten these bracelets, so please let me know if you have any experience with tightening your bracelet, if it was the Oval Links Jubilee bracelet, and how was your experience with that. But to move on from the loose bracelet, let's talk about the clasp. So it's a pressed metal clasp with quite a few different micro adjustments here. And this is the USA made Rolex bracelet and clasp. It's held in place with friction, so it's a friction lock based clasp. And I know a lot of people will complain about that. Oh my God, you spent $2,500 on a watch, you spent $3,000 on a watch, and it has a fold over metal clasp. And it's friction held in place, and it has a Jubilee bracelet that's all loosey-goosey, and it doesn't have a sapphire crystal, and it doesn't have this, and it doesn't have that. Guys, this is a vintage Rolex. Of course, it's not going to have the specs of a modern watch. It's the same thing as buying a vintage Porsche 911 and complaining that it doesn't have a cruise control. Of course it doesn't have a cruise control. That's the point of a vintage Porsche 911. And it's the same thing here. Of course it doesn't have the sapphire crystal. Of course the bracelet is going to be more loose. Of course it's going to have some quirks. Of course it's not going to be brand new and super sharp angles and all these things. That's kind of the point. That's why you buy a vintage watch. So keep that in mind if you're looking for one of these watches. It's not gonna look brand new. It's not gonna look like a modern Rolex. That's the review portion of the video. Now let's talk about my experience of owning this watch for over a year and my feelings towards it. I guess the most important question is, do I still love it? And given a choice, would I buy it over again? The answer to those questions is yes and yes. This watch has a special place in my heart because it's my first Rolex. Now, I should say that not everyone likes Rolex watches, and that's okay. It's totally fine. Not everyone has to like the same watches, to each their own. Since I bought the watch, I haven't regretted buying it even once, and I haven't even thought about selling it. I constantly find myself wearing this watch on the weekends, or if I have some event to go to, if I'm wearing a suit and tie, this is the watch that I would reach for. Everything about the watch is great. The movement is great. It's very accurate. I have no problems with that. The overall look and condition are great. The only issue I have, and I mentioned this in the review part of the video, is that the bracelet is too loose. I mean, that doesn't look good and it's not too safe. So I will probably go ahead and tighten up this bracelet at some point. Now, the reason why I haven't done it yet, because I still need to buy additional links. Of course, when you tighten the bracelet will get smaller, and then send the new links that I bought for the bracelet plus the bracelet to someone to tighten it. Now I want to talk about one more thing that happens after you buy an expensive watch like this. In grand scheme of things, it's not too expensive. $2,500 is not that much, but up until the purchase of this watch, this has been the most expensive watch purchase. Since I purchased this watch, I bought quite a few more expensive watches. They're not really expensive watches, but to me, they are expensive watches. So what exactly happened? How did I go from buying this to then buying an Explorer? I think this watch has been an important step in my watch collecting journey. I have this theory that you have to get comfortable at each price point. After spending almost $3,000 on this vintage Rolex Datejust, I was more comfortable spending almost $6,000 on the Rolex Explorer. You kind of graduate and you go up in the levels. Now, not to say that everybody has to do that. Maybe you're not comfortable going up, maybe you don't need to go up, and that's totally fine. You don't have to go up in a higher price categories. To me, for the longest time, this watch has been that ceiling. And ever since I bought it, I started looking at more expensive watches. And I think that's what happens with a lot of watch collectors. Once you get comfortable at a certain price category, it might be $500, it might be $5,000, you start looking at watches just over that price category. And once you get comfortable at that price category, you start looking at watches just slightly over that price category. I don't know if other people can relate to that, but that at least has been my personal experience with this watch and other watches after buying this one. I appreciate you watching this video until the end. Please give it a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Subscribe to the YouTube channel if you don't want to miss more videos like this one in the future. And leave a comment in a comment section below. Let me know what you think about Rolex Datejust 36mm. Is it too small? Would you go for the 41mm? How do you feel about vintage watches? Leave all those thoughts below. I always enjoy reading your comments. By the way, today on my wrist, I'm wearing Aviate Spitfire 300 Flieger watch. I did an unboxing and a mini review of this watch. That video can be found on my Instagram page. I will leave a link to that video in the description below. Also in the description below, there are two other links. The first link is a secret link. Have a look if you're curious. The second link is a link to bondnaderstrap.com. If you're looking for a good quality nader strap and want to support this YouTube channel at the same time, buying one of these nader straps is a good way to do so. Thanks for watching this review. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you had fun. And I'll see you guys next time. Bye. Yeah. I'm giving you more. Oh boy. After this, I'll take you for a walk, okay?